happy to read today Pride and Prejudice. It is a universally acknowledged truth that a man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering of a neighborhood, this truth is so much well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as the rightful property of some one or some other of the daughters. "My dear Mr. Bennet," said his lady to him one day, "have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last?" Mr. Bennet replied he had not. "But it is," returned she, "for Mrs. Long has just been there, and she told me all about it." Mr. Bennet made no answer. "Do not you want to know who has taken it?" cried his wife impatiently. "You want to let me, and I have no objection in hearing it." This was invitation enough. "Why, my dear, you must know Mrs. Long said that Netherfield is let by a young man of a large fortune from the north of England, that he came down on Monday in a chaise and four to see the place, and so delighted with it that he agreed with Mr. Morris immediately that he is to take possession before the Michaelmans, and some of his servants are to be in the house by the end of the week." "What's his name?" "Bingley." "Is he married or single?" "Oh, single, my dear, to be sure. A single man of large fortune, 4,000 or 5,000 a year. What a fine thing for our girls." "How so? How can it affect them?" "My dear Mr. Bennet," replied his wife, "how can you be so tiresome? You know that I am thinking of his marrying one of them." "Is that his design in settling here?" "Design? Nonsense! How can you talk so? But it is very likely that he may fall in love with them, and therefore you must visit him as soon as he comes." "I see no occasion for that. You and the girls may go, or you may send them by themselves, which perhaps will still be better, for you are as handsome as any of them. Mr. Bingley might like you best of the party." "My dear, you flatter me. I have had my share of beauty, but I do not pretend to be anything extraordinary now. When a woman has had 5 grown daughters, she ought to give over thinking of her own beauty. In such cases, a woman has often not so much beauty to think of. But, my dear, you must go and see Mr. Bingley when he comes into the neighborhood." "It is more than I engaged for sure, I assure you." "But consider your daughters. Only think what an establishment it'd be for one of them. Sir William and Lady Lucas are determined to go merely on that account. For you, in general, know that they visit no newcomers. Indeed, you must go, for it will be impossible for us to visit him if you do not. You are over-scrupulous, surely. I dare say Mr. Bingley will be very glad to see you. And I will send you a few lines to assure you of the hearty consent of his marrying whichever one he chooses of my girls, though I must throw in a good word for my little Lizzie." "I desire you will do no such thing. Lizzie is not a bit better than any of the others, and I'm sure she's not so handsome as Jane, nor half as good-humored as Lydia. But you are always giving her preference." "They have none of them much to recommend," replied he, "as they are silly and ignorant little girls. But Lizzie has been something more of a quickness than her sisters." "Mr. Bennet, how can you abuse your own children in such a way? You take delight in vexing me. You have no compassion on my nerves." "You mistake me, my dear. I have a high respect for your nerves. They are my old friends. I've heard you mention them with consideration these 20 years at least. You do not know what I suffer. But I hope you will get over it, and I will live to see many young men of 4,000 a year come into the neighborhood." "It will be no use to us if 20 should come, since you will not visit them. Depend on it, my dear, that when there are 20, I will visit all of them." Mr. Bennet was so an odd of a mixture of quick parts, sarcasm, humor, reserve, and caprice, that the experience of 23 years had been insufficient to make his wife understand his character. Her mind was left difficult to develop. She was a woman of mean understanding, little information, and uncertain temper. When she disconnected, she fancied herself nervous. The business of her life was to get her daughters married. Its solace was visiting and news. That ends chapter 1. See you soon.